Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, a home for girls in the Bienville Parish town of Arcadia is being investigated for alleged incidents of sexual abuse over several decades. We'll take a detailed look at that tonight. We'll also discuss a more upbeat investigation, this one of a West Bank school and its experience with a Common Core curriculum. Also on our agenda are new rules about city employee residency. And as the French Quarter Fest begins and the Jazz Fest nears, we'll look at the condition of the quarter and also the growth of a local recording industry. On the charts for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Sarah Carr, education reporter of the New Orleans Advocate and the Hechinger Report. Kathy Finn, freelance journalist and reporter for Reuters. And Rebecca Catalanello, reporter for NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. And we'll start first with Errol. And council made a decision this week regarding residency rules for first responders.
Yeah, residency's been around for a while. It's always been a very sensitive and politically charged issue. On the one hand, the argument is that if people work for the city, they should live in the city and contribute to the city. On the other hand, is that a lot of the people, especially the kind of people who are first responders. I mean, you know, they might be they're from younger families, and they might live outside, and they might like the suburban dream. I mean, why prevent them from working in the city? So it's been an ongoing issue. Residency used to be the rule. It was suspended for 7 years after Katrina. The 7 years expired last year, and so they started enforcing it again. But you know, the breaking point of it is that I remember under Ray Nagin, before he fell from grace, Eddie Compass, who was the police chief, and mayors and police chiefs had routinely supported residency before that. Mostly because it was like an urban issue and it's urban jobs. But I remember the day Eddie Compass came out and said we need to change it. He says the pool is just too small, that we just can't draw people. Now he did this with Nagin's response, and I thought that people were surprised that Nagin had some great moments, but I thought this is one of Nagin's good moments of his administration when they finally came around and publicly acknowledged it. And one point they made, and the point is still being made, there are a lot of people who may work for suburban or rural sheriff's departments who are qualified police officers who would like to work for big city police department, one because the salaries better, but all because of civil service protection. And so there are people out there, you know, who would like those kind of jobs if there was a chance, but when the circle is so narrow that you can't recruit, then it causes a problem. So in that sense, in terms of being able to go out and get the very best people, it makes sense. Now, a personal observation here is I'll have to say that my mom lived in the city, and she was a widow, and there was a policeman who lived next door. And the policeman who lived next door because he had to. And I really liked that. I mean, he was a wonderful guy, and it was just I felt so comforted by having a policeman living next door to my mom. And so you understand the value of having first responders living in your neighborhood. And so there's real value. So one would hope that even though they don't have to live in the city, that they'll be enticed enough to come and do it, because I think it'll be better for everybody all the way around.
Yeah, well, certainly one of the concerns has been also that it can be more expensive to live in Orleans Parish, and that the salaries really that police would make, particularly the newer officers, particularly the police officers, would have a harder time affording it. And so I know the Police and Justice Foundation and the New Orleans Police Department have seen right now that their need to lift this domicile rule, because it is impacting, they see that it is impacting their recruitment effort, and there is a big recruitment effort right now going on.
And there's so many elements to this, like if a lot of these people have young families, and in the past, if they're comparing schools in Orleans Parish to schools wherever they live, then that right there can be, affect the decision. And so if things happen in Orleans Parish where people can start believing in the schools more, then maybe that can affect that too, and maybe you can have more policemen living on your block.
So right. Is the domicile rule, now this is for first responders, and we mean police, fire, and EMTs.
Right, right.
Is it now lifted or suspended?
It is lifted. There's no more rule requiring it. And it passed the council by a 6-1 vote. James Gray was the only one who opposed it, and his argument was that I think we need more study. And even Cynthia Hechinger, who was an advocate of this and who was very supportive, saying, don't think this is a cure, that there's a lot of other issues with the police department that still need to be fixed, but at least it's one issue.
Okay, that distraction, as
Right,
Councilwoman had said, is off the books now.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, Errol. Over to Rebecca right now. Rebecca, you did a very comprehensive and extensive series that is really compelling, and also there's video as well as print to it, about a girls' home in northwest Louisiana that now, it's been under investigation off and on, but a group of women have really made it a point to make sure that some of what they claim happened is investigated. Tell us more.
In December, photographer Kathleen Flynn and I traveled to North Louisiana, where we understood a woman from Las Vegas was going to be making a report to police about abuse that she said happened 25 years ago when she was a resident at the New Bethany Home for Girls in Arcadia, Louisiana. New Bethany Home for Girls is a school that was open from 1971 to 2001. It was a religious girls' home founded by a man named Mac Ford, who is a preacher in the Independent Fundamentalist Baptist Church. Over the years that it was open, there were numerous investigations into abuse there, physical abuse. There was this sort of this ongoing cycle of children running from the home, telling law enforcement about abuse, state and local officials attempting to investigate it, and then one or two children, or maybe the entire school, being raided and children being taken out, and then the school would continue to operate after that. This happened time and time again. If you look back at the news coverage over the years, it just was ongoing, until finally in 2001, the school's board decided on its own to close its doors.
So it's not operating anymore?
No, it is closed. But in the last year, we know of 4 women who have come forward and talked to law enforcement about sexual abuse that they said happened at the home. The 4 women who I've spoken to have all named the founder, Mac Ford, as chief among their abusers. And the woman who we spent time with, Jennifer Halter from Las Vegas, who made this journey, is among them. We were with her as she went to the sheriff's office and attempted to make her report, which was not an easy thing. At first, she was told no, that she couldn't just make her report. Eventually, when the sheriff learned of the distance that she had traveled and learned that she was dying of a cancer-like condition called histiocytosis X, he agreed to take her report. And then we were with her the next day when she traveled to New Bethany to visit the house, the school one last time.
So why would the sheriff have not taken the report?
At the time, he said that the state police had taken over the investigation. But we found that the sheriff, at that point, although he says today that he believes that that there is investigation merited and that they are investigating, at the time he was communicating, the Paris was communicating to women who wanted to make sexual abuse reports that it was incumbent upon them to travel to Arcadia to make the report. And these are women who live all over the country. The women who traveled to support Jennifer as she made her report were in Houston, North Carolina, one here locally in Metairie who we went up with, and another in Kansas. So they're all over the country.
So Jennifer was there in Bienville Parish, so she had come to make the report, but she was first told, no, you can't make the report.
Yes.
But subsequently, ultimately she did, though.
Ultimately she did. And the sheriff and the sheriff says that they are investigating. At the time, he also said that the state police had taken over the investigation. Since we went there, the state police and the Bienville Parish Sheriff's Office say that they are jointly investigating. It wasn't clear at the time that we went there that that was the case. But
So are the investigations really ongoing much more than they had been before, do you feel?
From what we can tell, the law enforcement officials are not really interested in talking much with me as a member of the media, but from what I can tell, it does appear that the state police especially is taking this seriously and is doing more than paying lip service to the investigation.
Sarah, I know Sarah had a quick question.
Yeah. Was it challenging for you to gain the women's trust, or did you find that they just so wanted this story out there that
it's so interesting? There's a line in the story in which I say that the most remarkable thing about this time that these women came together was that they were believed, and I think that these women have been through so much that they're so used to being disregarded and being told that they're not telling the truth, that to have somebody sit there and listen to them was a relief.
And you did tell their stories, and we might say that Mac Ford is still alive. He's age 82 and living up there in the same complex or in Arcadia. Correct. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us. And it's, once again, a compelling series, NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune.
Thank you.
Over to Kathy and our recording industry. Now, New Orleans has always bemoaned the fact that we could never really have a recording industry like Nashville, but we have something there.
It's true. Over the years, when I have covered just the business of the industry in New Orleans, that's the question that always comes up. Is we have more great indigenous music than any other city, probably in the United States, perhaps in the world, but we don't have that recording industry. We're not in Nashville, we're not even in Austin, in terms of having that infrastructure and the agents and the whole business. I think over time that has become less of a crucial and compelling question, however, because the industry itself has changed so much. And what we've seen is a huge decline in revenues to the global recording industry. And much of that has gone to the digital downloads. It's the distribution part of the industry that has really changed dramatically. Now that you can go buy a single song on iTunes, you don't have to buy an album, you can buy what you want. You can have it in your hands, so to speak, in a heartbeat almost. That has dramatically changed the way people buy and consume music, and that's, it's made the recording industry itself much less powerful in terms of the fact that artists no longer have to kiss the ring, so to speak, in order to get there. In order to be noticed at large. They don't have to have that album from Sony necessarily, or Universal, or one of the big three these days. And in fact, they can sit down and record a whole album in their kitchen because of the great software that's available to them. They have a good microphone, that's really just about all they need. And they can even get it on iTunes or one of the many other downloadable music services. So they can get their music out there, and if they happen to be good at social media, which many are, they can also market and promote it a lot and really get a lot of followers for their music without ever having spoken to an agent at Universal. So that's a big change, and it's made a difference, I think, in the recording industry in New Orleans. Now, last year we did lose one of the major studios that we had here, Piety Street Recording, which for about a dozen years had become one of the, it was probably the front runner in New Orleans and was really recording everybody of note in New Orleans, as well as a great many others who came in from other places. Dave Matthews, for instance, a lot of other big names that came in and recorded at that studio. And that closed last year. The owner said it was not so much because it wasn't viable, but rather because he wanted to go into other parts of the music business and not just sit at a recording desk all day long.
That's Mark Bingham, and he's been involved in New Orleans music industry for a long time.
Correct.
He's been here for a while.
But in a way, that's kind of been good for some of the other studios. The Music Shed is another very viable and very competitive music studio in New Orleans, and it's picked up a lot of business. And it's really a fairly young. I think it was only founded in 2006, so it's a relatively young studio. Esplanade Studios is another. This is a very interesting one. It's a newer one. This is actually what used to be the Third Presbyterian Church on Esplanade Avenue. and a Russian recording engineer and musician. I won't attempt his name because I know I'll get it wrong. But he took over the place, totally renovated it into an architecturally beautiful recording studio. Not only is it acoustically wonderful, but this now has the space to do film scores. You can put a 70-piece orchestra in this place. So this is a big deal for linking it up with the film industry
and that's a
locally.
new avenue here, obviously, with our increased movie and film production.
A new and important avenue to the music business here in New Orleans. Word of mouth recording studios is another one. The Living Room Studio. These are very viable studios that are getting good business. And what you find is a lot of those people who maybe recorded, maybe not in their garage, maybe in the kitchen where the acoustics are a little better, and got noticed that way, and then went on to maybe the Music Shed or one of these other studios and actually make an album.
Yeah, to have a better place to record. But really, the core thing is not so much the bricks and mortar, which is important, certainly with a good recording studio, but it's the New Orleans sound.
It's the New Orleans sound, and they're getting out there even more than they used to be. And of course, we had the tremendous attention from the TV series Treme, which really gave a huge boost to local music.
But did we have the next step, the marketing people and the packaging people and the attorneys and those sort of people that all supported the industry?
Well, again, many of those things are still important to the industry, but a lot of them are not nearly as important as they once were. That whole distribution and packaging, you're not packaging CDs anymore, you're downloading the music from the internet. The marketing, again, that's all changing dramatically.
And musicians still do seek out those contracts.
Oh, they do.
Because that helps them distribute their sound.
Yeah, that's not to say the recording industry is done, but 70% of the recording industry's revenue now comes from downloaded music. So that distribution arm is the major change.
It's definitely shifted. But our New Orleans music continues to grind out there, and it's just absolutely beloved.
As we'll soon see this weekend at the French Quarter Festival and upcoming Jazz Festival.
That's right. A lot of it to hear. Thanks a lot, Kathy. We're going to shift over to Sarah right now. And Common Core. We've heard a lot about Common Core. What is Common Core? And we know that you did a series of looking specifically at one school, Belle Chase Primary.
Yeah, well, it's definitely important to emphasize that it's not a curriculum. It's a set of standards saying, that a student should learn place value at X age and sort of general educational principles, like that schools should really be emphasizing critical thinking and nonfiction reading. There's been so much political debate about it and also so much misinformation out there that I really wanted to see how it was playing out in an actual school and affecting the lives of teachers and parents and students. And I found that it was in a lot of important and unexpected ways. So I did a series of 3 stories following the implementation at Belle Chase Primary School on the West Bank. And in one story, spent a lot of time with a first grade math teacher and got a lot of vivid examples of changes that she was making. And in general, she was finding that she was going slower through the math progression, but in more depth. So she was really making sure that the kids understood the concepts before they moved on to sort of higher level math. And the second story was looking at how it's changing homework assignments for kids. And that was also focused largely on math, just because they put a lot of emphasis now under the standards on kids being able to solve math problems in different ways. So parents were looking at these worksheets and saying, what is this?
It was hard enough before,
But that was a lot of fun. There was one family that was really gracious, and I spent a lot of time shadowing them as their 10-year-old worked through these math problems at home. And the parents over time did get more comfortable with it. And I think it was this realization they had that they could always use the old way to check and make sure he got the right answer, even if he was drawing all these funny things they couldn't understand on a sheet. And then the final story, which appeared earlier this week, was looking at writing, and that was in the older elementary grades. And they really are asking the kids to do more sophisticated writing and thinking. In the past, it was a lot more sort of describe your ideal family vacation or write a story on X subject. But now, even for 9 and 10-year-olds, they're having them read passages and really requiring them to cite specific evidence and quotes from those passages in their writing. So I had kind of mixed feelings about it as a writer myself. Like, it was nice to see them being pushed to do such critical thinking and analytical writing at a young age, but But I did sort of wonder, that's also an age when kids love to write poems and experience creative writing, and they're still doing some of that, but just not as much.
I thought it was interesting you mentioned about de-emphasizing fiction, like the sort of reading list that any of us might have had, they're not having anymore, and it's going more toward nonfiction.
Yeah, and it's important to say it's not entirely nonfiction, and that's sort of one of the pieces of misinformation out there, that kids aren't going to be reading novels or poetry at all anymore. But at most elementary schools, they are finding they're having to change their reading lists and amping up the nonfiction considerably. You know, I think that school gave me an example that they might have kindergartners read a sort of science-based book about moths and butterflies, and then one that had those as characters in it. And it just, you know, I love nonfiction. I've always been a nonfiction writer, but as I said, I think a lot of kids get into writing at those age through kind of being able to just use their imagination. So I'm hoping that doesn't disappear.
So in their writing, they're having now to cite examples or evidence, sort of do like mini papers. It's sort of the early training, it sounds like, for preparing them to do papers. Is that right?
It really is kind of going to sort of a thesis-driven essay model at a very young age, because thinking back, I didn't really start doing that until high school. And it's not, you know, as I said, they're not reading Shakespeare and writing thesis statements about that, but an example might be that they would read a passage about Avery Island and one about a bayou swamp tour, and then have to make an argument that one would make for a more worthwhile educational trip and bring out evidence from what they read, as opposed from prior knowledge or just their own kind of what they want.
I thought it was interesting how you wrapped up one of the articles saying that they wanted to, these students wanted to write a letter to Governor Jindal complaining that they had to write so much. So the teacher said, it's a good writing assignment, but you have to cite the reasons why.
No, as I wrote, you know, Jindal has his own qualms about the Common Core, but they're not the same as the fourth graders.
Well, thanks a lot, Sarah. It's an interesting series of articles. It definitely does acquaint you a lot more with what Common Core is about, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that too. Thanks a lot. Errol, as we said, it's festival time. French Quarter Fest this weekend, Jazz Fest just right around the corner, a lot of music, a lot of tourists who are going to be coming to town.
Yeah, and the French Quarter always invites, at least in my mind, the time to talk about because of the festival, talk about the quarter itself and the condition of the quarter. And we need to begin by saying that the French Quarter is one of the great historic neighborhoods in the continent. It's still viable. It's still the soul of downtown New Orleans. Imagine downtown or tourism without the French Quarter. And it is still a living neighborhood. It's not to be compared with colonial Williamsburg or something like that, which is, you know, just carefully on the glass. And so it's still a viable living neighborhood. And, you know, when people say, well, the French Quarter is not what it used to be, it never has been what it used to be, because it's a changing neighborhood, that things change. That said, and it's certainly just a wonderful economic engine for the city. I mean, you just drive through the quarter and you can see that there are problems. And I was talking to some of the more thoughtful residents, and one thing that they're really concerned about is what they're calling extended rentals, like apartments that, you know, you used to rent to a person to live in for a while. Now people are just renting it, you know, for a few months, or you know, purposely landlords are doing. They get more money like that. And some people are renting those, and then they're sub-renting it to other people. And so what they're saying is you're not getting a residential base in your neighborhoods like you used to. It's just not the same thing. It's sort of like hotels almost, or long-term hotels. And so there's a big concern about that. I gotta say, it's not unique to New Orleans. I mean, you go to Manhattan and you see all those tall buildings. Well, you probably, a lot of those people, a lot of those units, those same sort of things, okay, it's people who weren't there. But it tends to happen, and it compromises because you have fewer everyday neighbors living in blocks. And of course, ideally in the neighborhood, you want your neighbors there, and you want your people that are living there. And of course, you have fewer families with kids because of it. So that remains a concern. Also, there's always been a concern about crime in the French Quarter. And one issue that they have is that as tourism has grown so much, that tourists, like criminals, know that tourists are more vulnerable, that they're easier to get. And then also that if they commit a crime, if they're caught, when the trial day comes around, the tourist is, you know, from somewhere else, and so probably won't be there. And so it's just making it a little bit more vulnerable to that. And the concern of that, because as the growth of tourism, little shops that in the past may have served local needs are being replaced by tourism-driven shops. And so those are issues, they're out there. There are some things that are kind of vague issues to me. I was in the French Quarter a few weeks ago, and from walking, I guess maybe 10 blocks or so, there must have been 5 groups of ghost tours that I passed by. Some people don't like that. I personally, if I lived in the Quarter, I'd love it, okay? Because it's groups of people who are walking your neighborhood throughout the night. To me, that's like having police. I mean, they're a little bit freaky kind of police, okay? Okay? But, and so anytime you have organized street activity, I think that's good, but I think that's a sign of the vitality of the French Quarter.
Yeah, it's just always the feeling that neighborhood quality of the French Quarter is just under pressure, and as you have the increased tourism, and that it just is even more pressure on it. Are there any rules and regulations regarding these kind of rentals?
There are, but people are getting around them, and so it's an ongoing struggle. And something else the person was complaining is that, of course, these people are parking. Someone was saying that she was walking down the street for a block, and just about every car was from out of town. And of course, they're subject to getting a ticket. But if you're from out of town, you don't have to worry about a ticket, and so it's causing more of parking pressure. But there was a time. 1930s, 1940s, I mean, the Quarter was more of a residential neighborhood, but it wasn't as economically viable of a neighborhood. And so I guess it depends what sort of trade-out you want.
Well, the Quarter is going to be hosting a lot of visitors this weekend, that's for sure, with the French Quarter Fest. Time to look ahead, Errol.
Well, squeezed in between the French Quarter Festival and the Jazz Fest is the Zurich Open, or as we used to call it, the New Orleans Open. The golf tournament starts next Monday. It's at the tournament golf complex on the West Bank, and they're really trying to emphasize gourmet dining there. They've built this club capacity at the 18th hole, and they've gotten some of the top restaurants in New Orleans so people can go in, watch the 18th hole of golf, sit down, and then order from some of the top restaurants. And so this is the way golf is being marketed these days. But the Zurich Open kind of gets lost sometimes in all the shuffle. So
with so much going on.
Yeah.
Sarah.
The teachers union really lost collective bargaining after Hurricane Katrina, and in the last couple of weeks, the teachers at Ben Franklin High School, one of the city's many charter schools, have said that they want to unionize, and they're the second charter school to make that move. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see if these two are just sort of individual one-offs, or if this is really the start of a movement towards unionizing at the city's charters.
Thanks, Sarah. Kathy.
Well, we've talked often about the startup business competitions on this show, and the business plans where they make a pitch trying to get funding for their new enterprise. There's another one coming up in the middle of Jazz Fest. It's called Launch Fest, and it's a project of Launchpad New Orleans, and you can find out more information by going to launchpadnola.com.
All right, Rebecca, quickly.
You probably saw this week that CMS released Medicare billing data, so I expect to see a lot of stories in the next few weeks about how our local doctors are.
That'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, you guys, for being here, and thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week. For Informed Sources, have a good evening.